2 mystery booms, 1 unanswered question. And the country is paying attention. On a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, the sky above the heart of South Carolina basically split in 2. Not figuratively. We're talking about a sound so massive, so chest-rattling and sudden, that over 1,400 people rushed to file reports with the federal government within just a few hours of it happening. Houses physically swayed. Airport hangar walls shook like tin cans in a windstorm. The United States Geological Survey, an agency that has seen just about everything, logged the incident into its official earthquake catalog under an event classification it almost never touches: sonic boom. Now here's where it starts getting really interesting. NASA stepped up and said, "Not a meteor." The Air Force came forward and said, "Not our fighter jets." The nearest fighter wing? They said absolutely nothing at all, just radio silence. And then, as if the universe decided one mystery wasn't enough for a single week, exactly 48 hours later and roughly 800 miles up the coast, the sky tore open again. This time right over Boston, Massachusetts. People felt it everywhere. From the college streets of Cambridge all the way out to the sandy beaches of Cape Cod, residents were shaken, literally. A satellite parked in geostationary orbit high above the Earth caught a mysterious flash lighting up the Atlantic Ocean below it, with not a single storm cloud underneath it to explain it away. Boston police scrambled units to the scene, fully expecting to find a blown-up building, a gas explosion, something, and came back with absolutely nothing to show for it. Just a confused neighborhood, rattled windows, and a whole lot of unanswered questions. So let's just sit with that for a moment. 2 enormous, unexplained booms. Same coastline, same week. All of this happening right in front of the most sophisticated atmospheric monitoring network ever assembled by human civilization. One of those booms got a tidy official explanation within 90 minutes. The other one? Still sitting wide open in the federal database. Source unknown, no attribution, no closure. And honestly, the booms themselves aren't even the strangest part of this whole thing. The strangest part is the gap. The yawning, uncomfortable gap between those 2 very different official responses. And the question that gap forces every one of us to ask. If you haven't already, smash that like button and hit subscribe right now. We're going deep on this one, and you don't want to miss a single update. Drop a comment below telling me whether you actually felt either of these booms from where you're sitting. I genuinely want to know. And share this video because your people need to catch up. Now, let's get into it properly. Part 1. The boom above. Boston at just after 2 in the afternoon on Saturday, May 30th, 2026, Eastern Daylight Time. A single, dense, almost physical thud of sound moved across eastern Massachusetts and rattled everything underneath it. Not a crack, not a bang, a boom with real weight behind it. The kind that you don't just hear but feel in your ribcage. The reports started flooding in almost immediately. Cambridge, Brighton, Scituate, Winchester, Arlington, Concord, Linfield, the North Shore, Cape Cod, neighborhoods. 30 miles apart, we're all reporting the same thing at essentially the same moment. The Boston Police Department sent units racing over to the Brighton neighborhood because residents had been calling 911 in a panic, convinced something had exploded nearby. Inside people's homes, items were tumbling off shelves. Doorbell cameras all across the city captured something fascinating: the unmistakable audio fingerprint of a sharp, low-frequency pressure wave that arrived in a fraction of a second and then faded out into a long, slow, rolling rumble, like distant thunder that just kept going a little too long. Within 10 minutes of the boom hitting, every social media platform covering the greater Boston area was absolutely on fire. Thousands of people all posting variations of the same 3 words. What was that? And look, that is the exact question this breakdown is going to spend a serious amount of time trying to answer. I'll be upfront with you right now. We are not going to land on a perfectly clean conclusion. The honest, data-supported answer as of this moment is that nobody knows for certain yet. What we do have are leading hypotheses, a fascinating satellite detection that points firmly in one direction, and a contradicting piece of evidence from 2 days prior that points just as firmly in another. And then there's the pattern, the uncomfortable, hard to ignore coincidence of 2 events on the same stretch of coastline within 48 hours of each other. That has the rest of the pull. Countries sitting up and paying close attention in a way that isolated one-off events simply never manage to do. The geography matters more than you'd think. Eastern Massachusetts hugs the western edge of the North Atlantic, a coastline that stretches from the rocky, windswept beaches of the North Shore all the way down through the Boston Harbor Islands and out along the long, curving sandy arm of Cape Cod. The cities and towns of Greater Boston sit inside this geography like stars in a constellation. Boston proper anchors the center. Cambridge sits across the river to the northwest. Lexington and Concord push further out along the corridor. Hingham, Cohasset, and Scituate anchor the South Shore to the southeast. The Cape Towns stretch away to the northeast. Here's why this geography matters. When a pressure wave rolls over a landscape like this, the pattern of felt reports actually tells you something meaningful about where the source was. A pressure wave that leaves a tight little footprint. Most reports bunched within a couple of miles of a single point is the signature of something small happening at ground level. But a pressure wave that scatters reports across 40, 50, even 80 miles in multiple directions? That's the signature of something happening high up in the atmosphere, with pressure radiating outward from an elevated source that has line of sight to a wide sweep of the surface below. The Boston reports fit that second profile almost perfectly. They came in from communities spread across a roughly 30 to 50 mile radius around the Boston metro core, with the densest cluster running from Cambridge through Brighton into Boston proper, and secondary clusters stretching out along the North Shore and pushing inland toward Worcester County. In the language of atmospheric acoustics, that kind of broad, diffuse footprint points to an aerial source. Something happened in the air, not on the ground. When police arrived in Brighton, they confirmed it. No fire, no structural damage, no debris, not so much as a scorch mark on the pavement. Just a neighborhood full of thoroughly baffled residents and a sky that looked by every visual measure completely and totally normal. Clear conditions. No thunderstorms within 100 miles, no smoke, no visible contrail cutting across the sky in the direction the pressure wave appeared to come from. Just the sound, the shaking, the police dispatch logs, and an ever-growing list of communities all reporting the exact same thing. The meteorologist who got there first real attempt at an explanation came from a meteorologist named Eric Fisher, chief meteorologist at WBZ, the CBS affiliate in Boston, and one of the most widely followed regional weather voices in all of New England. Within about 90 minutes of the boom, Fisher posted publicly that he'd already checked the USGS earthquake feed and found nothing. His initial suggestion was that the source might be a meteor. By 4:30 in the afternoon, barely 2 hours after the boom, Fisher had posted a follow-up with noticeably more confidence. In his professional opinion, the source was definitively a meteor. Definitely a meteor causing that big boom. Those were his words. The wider professional meteorological community, watching the event unfold in real time along the East Coast, largely converged on the same conclusion within the hour. Nick Stewart, a spaceflight meteorologist who professionally tracks launches and atmospheric meteor events, posted that the boom appeared to be a notably significant bolide entering the atmosphere. Stewart's basis for that call? A single compelling piece of evidence: the geostationary lightning mapper, the instrument aboard the brand new GOES-19 satellite operated by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration had registered a flash detection over the Atlantic, east of the Massachusetts coastline, within minutes of the boom. That flash had no thunderstorm beneath it. The sky was clear. In Stewart's reading, and in the reading that rapidly spread through the regional meteorology community, the signature was consistent with a bolide. A bolide, for anyone unfamiliar with the term, is the technical name for an exceptionally bright meteor, one large enough that it actually explodes in the upper atmosphere as it heats up during entry. When a bolide is big enough and the entry angle is steep enough, the energy released during breakup can generate a pressure wave that radiates outward in all directions. When that pressure wave hits the ground, it sounds like a sonic boom, because in a very real, technically accurate sense, that is exactly what it is. This is the leading hypothesis for the Massachusetts event right now. A bolide punched into the atmosphere over the western North Atlantic, shattered somewhere in the upper troposphere east of the Massachusetts coastline, and sent a pressure wave propagating westward and inland, reaching Greater Boston within seconds of the breakup. The GOES-19 lightning mapper caught the flash. The American Meteor, Society's public fireball reporting queue, began filling up with eyewitness submissions from all across the region in the hours that followed. The professional meteorological community had a credible, coherent explanation within 90 minutes. The question shifted almost immediately from, "What was that?" to, "Where exactly did it come down, and how big was the original object?" Seriously though, if you're just finding this channel, now is the time to subscribe. Hit the bell icon too so you don't miss the follow-up when more data comes in on this. Leave a comment telling me whether you felt either of these booms. I'm reading every single one. But here's where I need to pump the brakes, because there is a piece of this story that doesn't slot neatly into the bolide explanation. And it's the piece that turns this from an interesting atmospheric curiosity into something the whole country is watching with real unease. 2 days earlier, Thursday, May 28, 2026, an almost identical event, 800 miles to the south, over the Midlands of South Carolina. Buildings rattled across more than 100 miles of geography. Over 1,400 people filed felt reports with the federal government. The USGS opened a catalog entry, and then every conventional source got ruled out, one by one, without a single alternative being ruled in. The South Carolina boom is still officially unexplained. The Federal Earthquake Catalog records it as a sonic boom event. Magnitude 0.0, depth 0 kilometers. Location 6 kilometers north-northeast of a small community called St. Andrews in Richland County, South Carolina. The catalog page does not say what made the boom. It only lists what the boom was not. Not an earthquake, not a meteor per NASA, not an F-16 from Shaw Air Force Base. Per the Air Force, McEntire Joint National Guard Base, the facility closest to the cataloged point, said absolutely nothing at all. And then, 48 hours later, on a different state but the same coast and the same week, the sky cracked open again over Boston. The central question running through everything from this point forward is this: if the federal infrastructure can attribute one of these two booms in 90 minutes, but cannot attribute the other one in 48 hours, what is the structural difference between the two events that produces such a dramatically different result? And is that difference in disclosure telling us something about the nature of the events themselves? Or is it telling us something about the system that does the attributing? Because the answer matters. It matters for how seriously we take today's Boston event. And it matters for what we should actually expect the next entry in the federal catalog to say, when and if it ever comes. Part 2. What GOES-19 actually saw before we go back and dig into the South Carolina mystery. I want to spend some time looking hard at the satellite that produced the public meteor attribution for the Boston boom, because the speed at which a single satellite observation converted mass public confusion into a confident attribution is itself one of the most fascinating facts in this entire case. And understanding what that instrument can and cannot actually detect is essential groundwork for understanding why one of these two booms got an answer and the other one is still waiting. The satellite is called GOES-19. GOES stands for Geostationary Operational Environmental Satellite, a line of American weather satellites that stretches back to the 1970s. GOES-19 is the newest and most capable member of that family. Having reached full operational status in 2025, it orbits at roughly 22,236 miles above the equator in what's called a geosynchronous orbit, meaning it moves at the exact speed needed to stay fixed, above the same spot on Earth at all times. Its instruments are staring down at the same slice of the Western Hemisphere, the same continents, the same ocean, every single second of every single day. It is the backbone of weather forecasting for both North and South America, and it does not blink. The specific instrument that registered the flash today is called the Geostationary Lightning Mapper, or GLM. It first flew on GOES-16 back in 2017, and it has been a standard fixture on every GOES satellite ever since. It does exactly what its name says. It maps lightning, and it does this by snapping extremely high-speed images of the entire visible hemisphere and scanning every frame for sudden, brief flashes of light against the steady background of the planet below. The technical specifications here are genuinely worth pausing on. The GLM takes approximately 500 images per second. Each frame is processed by an onboard computer hunting for brightness anomalies, a sudden spike in light in a particular pixel that lasts for a handful of frames and then fades away. When the computer spots that pattern, it logs the event as a lightning flash, complete with a timestamp accurate to within a millisecond and a location accurate to within a few kilometers. Over the course of a single thunderstorm, the mapper might record thousands of these individual flashes, building a real-time picture of where lightning is hitting and how the storm is ramping up or dying down. But here's the crucial detail that makes this instrument so useful for our purposes. The GLM is calibrated for brightness sensitivity in a way that, by design, also makes it sensitive to other transient bright events happening in the atmosphere, events that have nothing to do with lightning at all. The most important of these, for everything we're discussing today, are bolides. When a bolide punches into the upper atmosphere, the friction between the incoming object and the air it's plowing through heats the object to incandescence almost instantly. If the object is large enough, that heating cascades into a rapid, violent disintegration, the entering body fragmenting into smaller and smaller pieces over the course of just a few seconds. During that fragmentation process, the object dumps its kinetic energy as electromagnetic radiation, mostly as visible light. From the perspective of a satellite sitting 22,000 miles overhead and staring down at the atmosphere, a bolide breakup looks like a sudden, brief, extraordinarily bright flash. It lasts somewhere between a few hundred milliseconds and a few full seconds, and there's no storm structure beneath it to explain it away. This is precisely the kind of signature the GLM is built to catch. And in fact, the instrument has already been formally credited with multiple bolide detections since it went operational. The most thoroughly documented recent example, prior to today, was a bolide that lit up the atmosphere over Lake Erie in northern Ohio on a Sunday afternoon in March 2026. The Cooperative Institute for Meteorological Satellite Studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison published a detailed technical walkthrough of that event, going through the satellite data frame by frame. showing the flash signature playing out against the cloud-free background of the lake. That analysis is sitting in the public record. It establishes, in peer-reviewed technical terms, that the GLM aboard the GOE's satellites can and does detect bolides. So when the mapper registered a flash over the Atlantic east of Massachusetts with no thunderstorm beneath it, and approximately coincident in time with the Boston boom, the regional meteorological community reached for the bolide explanation almost immediately. It's the parsimonious answer. It fits the signature. It fits the instrument's documented track record. It fits the prior precedent. And it explains the wide felt footprint of the Boston boom in a way that other hypotheses simply don't manage. Drop a comment right now if you want me to do a full deep dive on the GOES 19 satellite and how it actually works. A lot of people have no idea this technology even exists, and it's genuinely remarkable stuff. Like the video if you're finding this useful. It really does help get the word out. But I want to be completely straight with you about the limits of what a single satellite observation actually proves. The GLM is not infallible. The technical literature on the instrument documents several well-known categories of false positive that have to be filtered out before any detection is treated as a confirmed atmospheric event. The first category is reflections from cloud tops. When sunlight catches the upper surface of a tall cumulus cloud at just the right angle, the resulting glint can be bright enough to register as a transient event in the mapper's processing. The second is solar glints off open water. Same physics. When the sun hits a flat body of water at the right angle, the reflected light can briefly spike in a way that looks, from orbit, like an atmospheric flash. The third category is electromagnetic interference. Cases where the mapper's own electronics register a signal from a non-optical source and mistakenly process it as a brightness change. The mapper's onboard software has filtering algorithms designed to suppress all three of these false positive types. But the algorithms aren't perfect. They were never claimed to be. Every year, a small number of detections turn out, on follow-up analysis, to be reflections or glints or interference rather than genuine atmospheric events. The standard practice in the remote sensing community is therefore to treat any individual GLM detection as a candidate event, not a confirmed one, at least until it's been corroborated by independent observations from other instruments, by ground-based eyewitness accounts that agree on trajectory and location, or by the actual recovery of meteoritic debris on the ground. NOAA's processing pipeline for GLM data runs raw detections through several stages of automated filtering before anything gets flagged for public reporting. Stage 1 filters out detections in pixels with persistent thermal anomalies. Those tend to indicate surface features, not transient atmospheric events. Stage 2 filters out detections that don't display the characteristic light curve, shape of a genuine atmospheric flash, the sharp rise time and slower decay, that are the hallmark of real lightning or a bolide. Stage 3 cross-checks the detection against ground-based lightning detection networks. Stage 4 checks it against weather radar to see whether the event occurred inside an active storm's footprint. Detections that survive all 4 filters. And that occurred outside the footprint of any active storm, get flagged for human analyst review. That is where candidate bolide events typically emerge. As of the time I'm recording this, the American Meteor Society's public fireball queue is filling up with eyewitness reports from across the Boston area. That queue is where the public submits structured accounts of what they saw, where they were standing, and what direction the object appeared to be traveling. The Society cross-references all those submissions, and if enough consistent corroborating witnesses align, they assign the event an official identifier and reconstruct a trajectory. The Boston submissions hadn't yet been consolidated into an official event entry when I recorded this, That process typically takes anywhere from a few hours to a couple of days, depending on how many reports come in and how consistent they are with each other. If the American Meteor Society closes the Boston event with an assigned identifier and a confirmed trajectory, the bolide hypothesis is essentially locked in. The satellite flash, the absence of any storm correlation, the meteorological attribution, and the corroborated eyewitness trajectory would together form the kind of evidence chain that turns a public mystery into a closed case. But if the Society's process doesn't resolve cleanly, if the witness reports are too sparse, too inconsistent, or worse, if they conflict with the location of the satellite flash, then the bolide hypothesis stays exactly what it currently is, a hypothesis. The flash alone doesn't establish the source. It only establishes that the mapper registered something. The witnesses alone don't establish the source either. They only establish that people saw something. And as we're about to see in the South Carolina case, the story of what happens when the evidence chain fails to converge is a genuinely unsettling one. It shows what happens when the satellites don't register a flash, when witnesses don't consistently describe a meteor, when conventional sources get publicly eliminated one by one, and when the federal catalog entry sits open indefinitely, event type assigned, source attribution blank. That is the second event. And it is the event that is forcing the rest of us to take the Boston boom far more seriously than we ever would have if it had happened in isolation. Part 3. The South Carolina boom 2 days before Boston. The date was Thursday, May 28, 2026. The time was 5:24 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. The location was approximately 6 kilometers north-northeast of a small, unincorporated community called St. Andrews, sitting in Richland County, South Carolina, right on the northwestern edge of Columbia, the state capital. The cataloged source point falls in the general area of South Carolina State Highway 215 and a training facility known as the South Carolina Fire Academy. For people living in the Midlands of South Carolina that evening, the experience of that boom was, by every account, completely unforgettable. A meteorologist named Chris Jackson, who happened to be in South Carolina at the time, described it publicly within hours. He said it felt like someone had physically shoved him in the chest a split second before the sound hit. That's not a metaphor. That's the literal physical sensation of a pressure wave arriving faster than you can process it. A resident of Rembert, South Carolina, about 30 miles east of Columbia, reported that their house bent to the east and then righted itself. They called it an airburst. Airport footage from a nearby facility showed the metal walls of an airport hangar physically rattling and flexing in response to the pressure wave like they were made of cardboard. Doorbell cameras across entire neighborhoods captured both the deep, audible boom and the brief tremor it sent through building structures.